Hi everyone, my name is Mike Lynch, and if you're watching this video, then you're attending NATOA's conference this year in Denver, Colorado. Welcome, we look forward to seeing you. One of the things that we were told folks needed or might like is a little bit of a cheat sheet on all things telecom in the world of NATOA. So with us today is Nancy Werner, the General Counsel of NATOA, who does a fabulous job holding our hand and teaching us what's going on in the world of telecom in this country. So without much ado, I'm going to hand this off to Nancy. Nancy has been doing this role for NATOA. Now I pause for a second. I think it's been for 7 years, and she does a fabulous job. I'll give you a little secret. She is the best writer of a policy brief memo that I have ever met. And I often steal her copy and pretend it's mine. Of course, everybody knows that I'm not that smart, and it had to have come from Nancy. So Nancy, now that I've embarrassed you a little bit, let's start off with Telcom 101, a legislative primer.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Mike. And it might have felt like 7 years to you, but it hasn't been. I think it's 4.5, but who's counting?
Oh,
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're looking forward to seeing you in person at the conference. And just off the top, I will say if you have any questions about telecom law, policy, anything at all, go talk to Mike or me, and we'll have happy to talk to you in person about any of the questions. So what we're going to do today is just a very short, very high level. Here's the kind of things you probably want to know or have some idea about before we head into the conference, so you'll know what people are talking about when they start talking about things like silos. So Mike, should we talk about some silos?
let's go for it. Let's
Yeah.
go right to the tomato cans on the slide. Okay.
Right. So I always use this many years ago when I was first getting into telecom law. This is how the federal law was explained to me, and I found it so helpful that I have kept it for a long time. The reason we have these, they could look like tomato cans. That works too. They're supposed to be silos. I'm a Midwestern girl. I know what a grain silo looks like. Apparently Mike does not.
Never saw one in my life.
So the reason we do that, the silos are important, is because the way the federal law is structured is very segmented, and it was sort of crafted at a time when it was a little bit easier to figure out what type of company did what service, because it was sort of like the cable company provided cable service and the phone company did phone service, and it wasn't super confusing several decades back. As most of you know now, it's a little more complicated because your phone company provides video service and your cable company provides phone service, and whoever wants to provide broadband provides broadband. So it's a lot more complicated, but we're still just going to focus on this higher level structure that federal law still has, and that's the silos. So as you can see on my tomato can silos, Title I is information services. At this point in time, that means broadband services. If you're following the net neutrality debate over the last however many years, you'll know that broadband used to be a telecommunications service, which is the next tomato can. Right now, it's under Title I, information services. Title II is telecommunication services. Generally speaking, that means your basic phone, telephone service. Mike, I was trying to figure out, how do you explain to young people what basic telephone service is?
Let me stop for a second here. I started in this work doing cable for the city of Boston in 1996. And the good thing about that was I didn't know much about what happened before 1996. And I'm afraid now, for many of you listening, you were probably in diapers back then, so it doesn't really matter. But everything that is up here, information services, telecom services, and cable services, that is the way the law is structured. But as Nancy has already touched on, there are weird like side rules that have happened in the last 25 years. For instance, under cable service, you would think broadband given to you by the cable company would be a cable service. Ah, but wait, they changed that in '02 and said, no, 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 that's an information service. In telecom, well, telecom's your phone company. For me in Boston, that was Verizon or Ma Bell or whatever you wanted to call it, AT&T in many other parts of the country, Pac Bell, name we don't even know anymore. But that's changed. Everything has changed. And all of these services are now provided by all of these different types of providers. 96 was supposed to be the introduction of competition. So in some respects, we've used two metaphors of silos and tomato cans, but now I'll introduce a third. The 96 Act was to take down the fences and let everybody provide the service that others did. It did not work perfectly, but the premise was that competition will give people better service, better technology, and better pricing. 25 years later, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. We're paying an awful lot for this stuff. Okay, Nancy, now you take it back.
Yeah, no, that's great, Mike. I appreciate that. And what's really interesting about what you said, I mean, everything was interesting, of course, Mike, but what really the takeaway I have is it was supposed to break down these fences, as you said, but it kept the fences in the law. And that's a lot of what we're dealing with now is how at the local government level and the state level, what authority do we have over these different services and their use of the rights of way, or customer service issues? That all comes, some of it's from state law, but federal law obviously overlays all of what you can do at the state level. And by setting up a system that tried to get more competition and did get more competition, but keeping the silos, we have this weird regulatory issue where your cable company fits into the third silo over there under Title VI, but what about their broadband services? What about their voice services? So I highlight that because a lot of the conversations we will be having at the conference are going to be in between these silos. What is a streaming service? Is that a cable service? Is that a broadband service? You know, what authority is there over a streaming service? Those kinds of things are big questions now that we have to tackle because we're still stuck with silos, even though the whole intention was that the companies themselves wouldn't be stuck in these silos.
Listen, what Nancy is talking about is spot on. And one of the interesting things about being in the TOR is you have smart attorneys like Nancy who sort of take voluminous amounts of federal law and regulation, and they can just condense it down to something that we understand. Now, if you run a cable office in your town or your county, or you're doing a Joint Powers Act coalition of PEG providers, whatever it is, many times you might get a call from a constituent or a counselor or a selectman, something, and saying, I need help with my broadband. Fix it. You guys should have the authority to do it. Well, you know, we don't have that authority. However, we do have some authority over cable services. And if cable providers provide broadband, we can go under our licensing rules of cable and try to get something fixed. And with the phone company, we don't license phone companies all the time, but the state does. The state has a tariff structure for them, so we can work with them on customer service issues or pricing issues. So sometimes we're bootstrapping the existing framework, this basic framework that Nancy has been talking about. We're bootstrapping that in order to affect broadband, the future, because there are no rules and there are no regulations around broadband service in this country. Nancy, I hope I'm trying to just think about this from the perspective of a person who does the job and doesn't quite understand what rules empower them to do that job.
Right, exactly. And that's why we're explaining the silo structure. I realize it's still confusing, but it does show you that you have to look for, you know, where does this company fall and what authority might I have? I will add that at the state level, I mean, as Mike said, for information services, there's one statute we'll talk about in a second that can have a preemptive effect, but generally it doesn't say, the federal law doesn't say states and local governments have no authority over broadband. So that is a state level issue. And there are some states where the local government does have authority over broadband providers to some extent. For example, if your broadband provider is going to be installing facilities in the rights of way, you may well have authority to require a permit for construction. You might have the authority to require them to get some sort of license or franchise. That is not the case in every state, certainly, but it is a state-by-state issue, and it's important to understand that you've got to look at which silo you're in at the federal level, but then also what are the state restrictions or state level authority that I might have as well. So I think maybe we're ready to move on to some significant federal laws. We are not, I know this is going to disappoint all you viewers out there, we're not going to talk about these in detail. This is more of a, you know, for your reference, but we did want to touch on it because you will hear people as speakers at the conference throw out the Telecom Act or the Telecommunications Act of '96 or Section 253. And we just wanted you to have this resource so you could say, oh, hold on, let me pull up that slide deck and remind myself what that is.
And sometime when you're on your next vacation, you may want to print out these acts and peruse them, but they're as big as a phone book. Oh, wait a minute, there are no phone books anymore. But for instance, take the 96 Telecom Act. The 96 Telecom Act was the first major rewrite of what was the original act called in 1934, the Communications Act, right? Yeah. So it's amazing how much history is sitting on this page. And we're going to leave it right where it is, because after this video, you're going to have available to you this slide deck as a PDF. And if you want to follow these links and torture yourself by actually reading some legislation that came in the last century, knock your socks off. We're just not going to do it now.
Right, exactly. And the only thing I will add is these you will see how these kind of link back to the silos we just talked about. So the Telecom Act of 96 talks about telecommunication services, and the particular provisions I cited here relate to local authority over telecommunications providers and wireless providers. That falls into that particular silo. Cable Act, that falls into the Title VI silo. The Internet Tax Freedom Act is a limited, I shouldn't say limited, let's not qualify it. It's a preemption on tax on internet access services that has some limitations and other not limitations. So you can see how these all relate back, and kind of getting back to Mike's point a minute ago, where if you're sitting at your desk thinking, what can I do for this constituent who's upset about the price of their broadband service, you kind of have to work your way back through these laws, through those silos, to figure out, what can I do? Is there anything we could be doing at the local level?
Good. All right. And you'll see Nancy has, I think maybe we have it in the acronym, so we'll just slide on to the next slide, Nancy. Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, so this is again, not going to go over all of these, but we should mention that the Federal Communications Commission is a federal regulatory agency that NATOA and our members deal with a lot. They have the authority to interpret provisions of the Communications Act. And these rulemakings that are listed on your screen right here, that's a series of rulemakings in which the commission has interpreted the Telecommunications Act, the Communications Act in one way or another. Although 6409A, I don't think is technically part of the Communications Act, but nobody cares about that. So these are important because you can go read the statute and say, okay, I see what that means. You can even like search the case law in your jurisdiction and say, okay, I think I know what this means. But if you haven't looked at the FCC orders, you might not know what it means. You might actually be quite surprised at some of the ways the FCC has interpreted some of these statutes. And so these are all really important and things that NATOA and our members have worked hard on getting the FCC to see our point of view on these issues. And we've also been doing a lot to educate our members on what the impacts of these decisions are. So you will certainly hear stuff about the Section 621 order at the conference, and probably also a little bit about the small cell order and maybe even 6409A. So want to make sure you had that reference.
Right. And Nancy, in her explanation of these half dozen orders that we're talking about here, she's talking about the work that she has done on behalf of NATOA over the last 5 years with a collection of attorneys from both coasts and every state in the middle who have been involved. This is sort of perceived by local government as an attack on our ability to manage our rights of way. We believe, as local government, as a county or a town or a city, we believe that we can permit for that work, that we can manage our streets, we can tell people how to dig, what to dig, how to restore the street, and that we can collect a fair rent for it. There are industries who go to the FCC every single day and say we shouldn't be allowed to do that. So that's where the erosion comes from. There's this constant battle back and forth. Now, the industry can hire people to do that for them. That is their right. Unfortunately, we're very busy back in our own office doing our own job, so we don't have a lot of time to go talking to the FCC, and we lose ground sometimes. And it's folks like Nancy and the other attorneys who you may hire as consultants who help us and protect our local rights. So it's sort of important to understand, because this is not the first time it happened. It happened during the 90s around cable, and it happened in I mentioned it earlier, 2002, around what was called the cable modem ruling. That was when we were told you can't tax broadband because, cable modem really isn't cable. What? That doesn't even make sense, but that's what the rules now say. So we constantly lose to these rules because cities are more focused on the activities of the day than what's going on at the FCC. That's That's kind of a Reader's Digest version, and maybe, Nancy, I'm being too cynical, but I think that's kind of where we are today.
No, I agree. And again, I think it goes back to the person sitting at their desk in City Hall or wherever they may be, and they get that phone call from a constituent who's upset. If you haven't protected your authority, you can't help the people you're there to help. I think that's one of the things we really try to do is retain local ability to address the needs of their constituents in a nutshell. And
On many of these orders and much of the work that Nancy has done, our message to the FCC has been, look, don't just listen to the industry. Ask us a few questions. Bring us into the same room. We can work towards solutions. Nancy has built model ordinances for every community to use. We've written handbooks and guides on how to help people go through this process. Many of the larger cities have gone down the road of small cell and 5G and figured out very simple solutions to make it all work. So we're not trying to say here that we're somehow going to challenge and sort of barricade the fences and not let people into our streets. That's not it at all. We're simply trying to have an open dialogue with the industry to make sure that everyone benefits from these new technologies that are very quickly coming our way.
very, very well said, Mike. All right, we are actually nearing the end, folks. Hold on, we have some
Light
acronyms.
at the end of the tunnel.
Most of these are for your reference, like everything else here. Mike, you wanted to talk I think you should talk a little bit about NTIA, because some folks who've been doing this a while still probably don't know much about NTIA.
Okay, we'll jump.
Or you can start wherever you want.
No, NTIA is great because there have been, I'm sure you have heard it over the last couple of years, last year and a half, there have been maybe 4 or 5 big pieces of federal legislation which have come our way post-COVID. The first was CARES. CARES was kind of like a way of saying, we know all our local communities spent a lot of money responding to COVID. Here's some cash to replenish your budget. That's really what CARES was in some respects. And then immediately after CARES came ARPA, I believe, the American Relief Act. And that looked forward and said, geez, we got all sorts of problems we have to fix now. So many of them were sort of COVID related, but a lot of it, the goal was the economy was sort of working remotely, right? So everything was suffering. Supply chain was suffering, manufacturing was suffering, service delivery was suffering, all sorts of stuff. So this was an idea of putting some high-test fuel into the economy to make it work. And we in the world of broadband and cable and telecom were lucky because a little bit of this money came our way. Right after that, I'm skipping over a couple of the laws that came in here, and Nancy, interject, as you probably remember, but the final big cash cow, I guess, was the Infrastructure Act, IIJA. And there were billions of dollars in there. I think it was $65 billion, Nancy, in the act devoted to broadband. That's a hard number to contemplate when you think about it. There are 50 states. $65 billion is being given to us. We're in the cable business. We're in the telecom business. We're just public servants. We've never had anybody come to us and say, there's a few $100 million. How would you best spend it to improve digital equity in your community, to provide broadband in your community? That's exactly what is happening through this act. And NTIA is delivering that money. And you're going to hear about things and see acronyms on the next page, I think, for programs like BEAD and APC. And you know what, Nance, maybe we should just jump right to it.
Yep.
Oh, thank you. All right, great. So there's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As I was talking to you, I couldn't remember what the acronym stood for. That's how bad things are getting. The Broadband Equity and Access and Deployment, sometime in the next, no, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, I think, every state said to the NTIA, we're in, we want some of your money. We're not sure how we're going to spend it, but we'll take I think it was $5 million, which is available to us to help figure out with our cities, towns, and counties how we're going to spend that money. So if you have not talked to your state broadband office, Google it, get their email address, start talking to them now, because there's a piece of that money there for you. I don't know if it's senior citizens, I don't know if it's the poor or those in need in your community, or whatever it is. I don't know if it's just because you don't have broadband access in your community, but for some reason you should get in touch with that office and say, we need help. What are you going to do for us?
Yeah.
Nancy, do you want to look at the Digital Equity Act? Or?
Yeah, well, I want to say first, we are going to have a couple of sessions on these grant programs at the conference. So you'll be getting an overview of all of these at the conference, and then sort of the type of advice that Mike was just talking about. Like, you really need to be in touch with the BEAD program with your state, because states are administering those funds. The Digital Equity Act is also a lot of money, and it's for digital equity, not surprising, giving the name. There are several different sub-programs under here. They're giving states money to plan, to come up with digital equity plans, and then they're going to give money to implement those plans. And then there's also going to be some competitive funding that is going to be available, which is, I think, a really good recognition that broadband deployment is critical, obviously. But for people that don't understand how to use a device, that need those digital kind of skills, that's very important. That's a piece of that. And just the push toward digital equity is really clear in all of these grant programs and how they're set up, and their goal of really making sure that everybody has access to affordable broadband across the country.
Great. Nancy talked about grant making programs. There's one program here that I want to highlight, and you'll see it in the bottom right of your screen. It's ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. This is not really unique, but this is a huge benefit for communities that already have cable or telecom built out and already have availability of services. This is an affordability program. I think it is $14 billion. Again, these numbers sort of throw me off. I keep coming back. Was it the Senator Dirksen line from Illinois many years ago? $1 million here, $1 million here. Pretty soon we're talking real money. Now we do this with billions. It's absolutely mind-boggling. At any rate, sorry, let me get back to the program. ACP is managed by an agency called USAC, but it's inside the FCC. And if you can figure out how a household in need can apply for this, it's 8 questions on a big, complicated federal form. But basically, it's give me your name, give me your address, give me the program you're involved in. Are you in public housing? Are you a SNAP recipient? Do you get Medicaid? Do you get free lunch? Do you have SSI? Do you get survivor benefits or veterans benefits? If you qualify any of those big umbrellas, we're going to pay your broadband bill, whether it's wireless or a program from, say, Comcast, like Internet Essentials, or from another provider. We're going to pay your bill, and we're going to pay that company directly, so you won't even see it. So this is sort of a lifeline broadband service. And I use the word lifeline because some of you may remember that there's a similar service just for phone service called Lifeline. People couldn't afford to be connected. The government had stepped in decades ago and said, we're going to pick up that bill because we know that every home should have a phone. And what they're saying under ACP is, we're going to pick up the tab on this because we believe everybody should be online. This brings money into your community. Can you imagine your public housing community in your city or town? If you get everybody signed up, that's an infusion of new money into your city or town to support your residents. It's free dollars from the federal government. It's not exactly an entitlement, but it's funded. And you should get to know what this program is and how you get people to sign up. And later on, probably during the conference, you'll hear that the FCC is even going to give money to us to help us let people know about that. Sorry, Nancy, I went on too long on that, but I think ACP is critically important at a critical time in our country, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you did not go on too long. So, and there will be more talk about that at the conference, and particularly the grants. So here is our last slide. This is just, again, more acronyms for your viewing pleasure. I think one I would point out, you might hear LFA quite a bit. I talked about the 621 order, which is cable. Remember the silos, Title VI. There'll be a lot of talk about cable of LFAs. So if you hear the word LFA, you know, that's Local Franchising Authority. A lot of the rest of the stuff I'm not sure will come up as much at the conference, but just, again, you'll have this as a reference if you need it. And Mike, you want to talk about any of these in particular?
I think I might, because there may be some people on this call who come out of the world of PEG. So there are a couple of things. There's American Community Television Act, which we did not touch on in this slide, but it's a piece of legislation we'd like to see move forward. Not sure how well it's moving forward, but Mottola works very hard on this, encourages all of our members to get their federal officials to sign on to this, and the Alliance for Community Media works on this as well. It fixes a little mistake, what Nancy is talking about, the 6-to-1 order. It fixes a mistake in the order or the law to make sure that they don't take money away from PEG centers. Beyond that, I think everything else, plain old telephone service. Nancy started talking about that. I don't know if you ever saw a dial-up. A dial-up phone is plain old telephone service. End of story. Doesn't
That's what I
exist
came up
anymore.
with too. If
I
you
think
ever had a
there's one
phone
behind me on a tower.
call or something, that's what that is.
That's right. So,
Okay,
all
well
right.
then, Mike, I didn't put you on here, not because you're not an
I'm
important resource.
so
Mike,
glad you didn't put me
wanted
on
to
here. This is
say
Nancy
to you,
Werner. She does answer that phone number. I've used it many, many times every week.
yes, and as I said, better yet, come up to me or Mike at the conference, introduce yourself, and then say, we didn't know what the heck you were talking about that whole time. Hopefully you will say, I got most of it.
If you're
But
watching
Mike,
this before you get to the conference, there is a first timers event. It's not really, you don't have to be a first timer. If you found this little presentation made you ask some more questions, come to the first timers event, which I believe is Monday evening.
yes,
Monday evening, I think it's around 5 o'clock. You'll see it on the agenda. Join us there. We'll
5:15.
okay, 5:15. We'll be able to answer some of these questions or connect you with someone who can do it for you. Thanks, Nancy.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, Mike. This was fun.
Thank
And
you.
to everyone out there, we're really excited to see you at the conference.
See you in Denver.